Picture this moment. It's a scorching afternoon in August, 479 BC. You're a Spartan warrior kneeling in the dirt. Arrows are raining down around you, thud, 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 hammering into your bronze shield. The man beside you screams as an arrow finds his throat. Another drops, clutching his leg. You're bleeding from a dozen small cuts. Your mouth tastes like copper and dust. And your general? He's turned his back on the enemy. He's not watching the Persians. He's not rallying the troops. He's staring at a dead goat's liver, waiting for the gods to tell him if today is a good day to fight back. You've been kneeling here for over an hour. Men are dying all around you. The slave soldiers behind you. Men with no armor, no bronze, just leather and hope. They're being slaughtered. And you can't move, you can't charge. You can't even stand up, because you're a Spartan, and Spartans don't break formation. This is the moment that will decide Western civilization. This is the Battle of Plataea, and this is how 10,000 Spartans avenged the 300. Before we dive into one of the most brutal battles in ancient history, if you're fascinated by the real stories behind legendary wars, the kind of history they don't teach in school, hit that like button and subscribe. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It's mind-blowing to think we're exploring these ancient battlefields together from all corners of the world. Now, everyone knows the story of the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae. It's been immortalized in movies, comics, and memes. King Leonidas, the narrow pass, the betrayal, the last stand. It's the ultimate tale of heroic sacrifice. But here's what they don't tell you. The 300 died. They lost. And after Thermopylae, things got worse. The Persians didn't just win the battle, they went on a rampage. They burned Athens to the ground, not once, but twice. They enslaved thousands. They desecrated temples. They turned Greece into a smoking graveyard. The survivors were traumatized, homeless refugees living on ships and islands, watching their civilization burn. But 1 year later, everything changed. At a place called Plataea, the Greeks, led by the Spartans, didn't just fight back. They unleashed a tidal wave of violence so complete, so merciless, that the Persian Empire never fully recovered. This is that story. Let's set the scene. It's 480 BC. The 300 are dead. King Leonidas' head is on a pike. The Persians have broken through the pass at Thermopylae, and they're flooding into Greece like a tsunami. King Xerxes, the god king of Persia, marches into Athens with the largest army the world has ever seen. Estimates range from 200,000 to over 1 million men. The Athenians have already evacuated. The city is a ghost town. Xerxes doesn't care. He orders it burned anyway. Every temple, every house, every monument to Greek culture, torched. The Acropolis, the sacred heart of Athens, goes up in flames. The smoke can be seen for miles. The Greeks are finished, right? That's what everyone thought. That's what Xerxes thought. But then something unexpected happens. The Greek navy, led by the Athenians, wins a shocking victory at Salamis. They lure the massive Persian fleet into narrow waters and tear it apart. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne on the shore, sees his ships burning and realizes he's made a catastrophic mistake. He panics. He turns around and goes home to Persia, leaving behind his general Mardonius, with orders to finish the job. Now, this is where we need to talk about Mardonius, because he's the real villain of this story. Xerxes was a showman. He traveled with a mobile palace, thousands of concubines, and enough gold to buy a country. He thought of the invasion as a royal procession. Mardonius was different. He was a soldier, a professional, and he was dangerous. When Xerxes fled, Mardonius trimmed the fat from the army. He sent home the conscripts, the baggage train, all the dead weight. What remained was 300,000 of the empire's most elite killers. These were the immortals, the heavy infantry who had broken the Spartan line at Thermopylae. These were the Saka horse archers from the steppes of Central Asia, men who could put an arrow through your eye from 100 yards while riding at full gallop. Mardonius wintered in northern Greece in the region of Boeotia. And the Greeks? They were scattered, terrified, and arguing among themselves. The Athenians were living as refugees on the island of Salamis. No homes, no city, just tents and despair. They sent envoys to Sparta with a message, but it wasn't a plea for help. It was a threat. March north and fight with us, the Athenians said, or we'll take our navy and join the Persians. And when that happens, your precious walls won't save you. Think about what that meant. The Athenian navy was the only thing that had stopped Xerxes. If it switched sides, Sparta and all of Greece was doomed. It was the wake-up call Sparta needed. The ephors, the leaders of Sparta, issued a mobilization order that still boggles the mind. They didn't send a token force. They emptied the city. 5,000 Spartiates, the full citizen elite warriors, suited up in their red cloaks and bronze armor. But here's the detail that shows just how serious they were. For every Spartan, they brought 7 helot slaves. These weren't just servants, they were armed. They were soldiers. That's 35,000 helots, plus 5,000 other Peloponnesian troops. In total, 45,000 men marched out of Sparta in a single night. When the Athenian envoys woke up the next morning, ready to deliver their ultimatum, the ephors just smiled and said, "You can stop shouting. The army is already at the border." The Spartans were coming, and they were bringing hell with them. When Mardonius heard that the Spartans had finally left their fortress, he didn't panic. He smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. See, Mardonius understood Greek tactics, the hoplite phalanx. That wall of bronze shields and spears was nearly unstoppable in close quarters and narrow passes in city streets. But it had a fatal weakness. It was slow. The phalanx turned like a battleship. On flat, open ground, Persian cavalry could dance circles around it, flanking it, peppering it with arrows until it broke. So Mardonius chose his battlefield carefully. He pulled his forces back from Athens, but not before burning it a second time. Everything that had survived the first torching? Gone. He wanted the Greeks to return to ash and rubble. Then he marched north to the plains of Boeotia, near a town called Plataea. He set up camp along the Esopus River in perfectly flat terrain, ideal for cavalry, a death trap for hoplites. And then, just to be extra secure, he built a fortress, not a small camp, a massive wooden stockade, a full square mile of walls and towers. It was a city of war, planted in the middle of an open field. Mardonius sat back and waited. He knew the Greeks would come, and when they did, he'd cut them to pieces. The allied Greek army, swelling with reinforcements from every city-state that wasn't collaborating with Persia, marched north. By the time they reached Plataea, they numbered over 100,000 men. Athenians, Corinthians, Megarians, Tegeans, and of course the Spartans. They reached the southern foothills of Mount Cithaeron and looked down at the plain. And they saw exactly what Mardonius wanted them to see: an ocean of Persian tents, thousands of horses, the glint of armor stretching to the horizon. The Greek commander was a Spartan named Pausanias. He was the regent, ruling in place of Leonidas's young son, and Pausanias was smart enough to recognize a trap when he saw one. He refused to go down onto the plain. The Greeks dug in on the rocky slopes of the mountain, where the Persian cavalry couldn't reach them, and for days nothing happened. It was a staring contest. Mardonius in the valley, Pausanias on the ridge. But Mardonius grew impatient. He hadn't stayed in Greece to stare at Spartans. He'd stayed to kill them. So he sent his cavalry commander, Mecistius, to test the Greek lines. Mecistius was a legend in the Persian army, a giant of a man, riding a Nisaean warhorse, one of those massive Central Asian stallions worth a fortune. His bridle was made of solid gold. He led a squadron of cavalry up the slopes, riding in circles, taunting the Greeks. The horsemen hurled insults and arrows, calling the Spartans cowards for hiding in the hills. The Greeks were pinned down, taking casualties, unable to strike back. A contingent of Megarians, Greek allies, sent a desperate message to Pausanias. "Send help, or we're leaving." Pausanias looked around. Who would volunteer to go down and fight cavalry on open ground? 300 Athenians stepped forward, an echo of the 300 Spartans. They rushed down with archers and engaged the Persian cavalry in a chaotic skirmish. And then, in a moment of pure luck, an arrow struck Mecistius's horse in the flank. The beast reared up and threw the Persian commander to the ground. The Athenians swarmed him, but they couldn't kill him. Mecistius was wearing scale armor under his purple tunic, advanced Persian engineering that turned their blades aside. They hacked at him and he fought back, a gold-clad tank of a man, until one Athenian soldier realized the trick. He jammed the spike of his spear through the eye-hole of Mecistius's helmet. The giant fell. The death of Mecistius sent shockwaves through the Persian army. The cavalry charged recklessly to recover his body, leading to a brutal brawl in the dust. But the Greeks held. They hoisted Mecistius's corpse onto a cart and paraded it through the ranks. The Greeks had drawn first blood. They'd killed Persia's favorite son, morale soared. But Pausanias knew this was just the beginning. Mardonius was watching from the valley floor, and he was no longer smiling. The euphoria didn't last long. It was August. The Greek sun was a hammer, beating down on men wearing 60 pounds of bronze. Dehydration killed faster than arrows. Pausanias looked at his position and realized they had a problem. They were too far from water. So he ordered a maneuver. The entire Greek army, 100,000 men, shuffled down from the heights toward the Esopus River, settling near a spring called Gargaphia. It seemed smart. Better access to water, still defensible. But Mardonius saw the opportunity. The Greeks had just extended their supply lines through the mountain passes, and those passes were now vulnerable. Mardonius snapped his fingers. Persian cavalry circled behind the Greek army and hit the passes. They intercepted a massive supply convoy, 500 wagons bringing food from the Peloponnese. They didn't just capture the wagons, they slaughtered the oxen and the drivers. The Greek army was cut off, no food, and soon, no water either. For 8 days, the two armies sat there. The Greeks were terrified to advance onto the open plain. They couldn't retreat without looking like cowards, so they baked in the heat while Mardonius tightened the noose. Every day, Persian cavalry would ride up to the river, launch volleys of arrows into the Greek ranks, and ride away laughing, taunting them, "Come fight like men!" But Pausanias held the line. Spartan discipline, iron will, and then came the breaking point. On the 11th day, Mardonius decided he was done waiting. He ordered his cavalry to bypass the Greek front line and hit their most vulnerable asset, the Gargaphia spring. The Persian horses trampled the spring, churning the clear water into thick, undrinkable mud. In hours, the only water source for 100,000 men was destroyed. Picture the situation. You haven't eaten a full meal in days. Your lips are cracked. Your tongue is swollen. The spring is ruined. Enemy cavalry controls the roads. You're trapped. Panic rippled through the Greek coalition. The city-state commanders started arguing. The Athenians wanted to attack. The Corinthians wanted to retreat. The Spartans were silent. Pausanias realized he had one option: retreat at night, in the face of the enemy, without being detected. It was one of the most dangerous maneuvers in warfare. The plan was logical. At the second watch of the night, the entire army would pull back to a defensive position called the island, closer to the mountains and fresh water. It required perfect silence, perfect coordination. Every contingent moving at exactly the same time. It was a solid plan, on paper. But as the moon rose over Mount Scytharon, everything fell apart. The center of the Greek line, soldiers from Corinth, Megara, and other cities, didn't just withdraw. They panicked. They grabbed their shields and sprinted away. They didn't stop at the agreed position. They kept running all the way back to the town of Plataea, huddling around the temple of Hera. In the dark, the Greek army just lost half its strength. Gone. But on the right wing, where the Spartans were stationed, the problem wasn't fear. It was pride. This brings us to Captain Amompharetus, commander of the Patana regiment. When the order came to retreat, he refused. He stood there, surrounded by his men, and told Pausanias, the regent of Sparta, the supreme commander, that he would not bring shame upon his country by running from the strangers, his contemptuous term for Persians. Imagine the scene. It's 2 a.m., pitch black. The army is trying to sneak away in silence, and Pausanias is having a screaming match with one of his own captains. Pausanias begged. He explained it wasn't retreat, it was tactical repositioning. Amompharetus didn't care about semantics. The argument got physical. Amompharetus picked up a boulder from the riverbed, a massive stone, and slammed it down at Pausanias' feet. "With this pebble," he shouted, "I cast my vote not to flee from the strangers." In Spartan democracy, they voted with pebbles. Amompharetus was mockingly using a boulder. Meanwhile, the Athenians on the left wing sent a runner. "What's happening? The sun's coming up. Are we leaving or what?" The messenger found Spartan commanders screaming at each other while the army stood frozen. Pausanias finally made a call. He ordered the main Spartan force to begin retreating, hoping Amompharetus would follow once he saw he was being abandoned. It was a game of chicken with thousands of lives. The Spartans began to march, constantly looking back. And finally, when Amompharetus realized he'd truly be left alone to face 300,000 Persians, he cracked. He ordered his men to jog and catch up. But it was too late. The sky was turning gray. Birds were singing. The sun crested the mountains. From the Persian camp, sentries rubbed their eyes and looked out at the Greek position. The center was gone. The Athenians were miles away. And the Spartans? Strung out in a long, disorganized column, isolated and exposed on the ridges. General Mardonius stepped out of his tent and saw the gift the gods had given him. He didn't see a tactical retreat. He saw a rout, a broken army fleeing in terror. He turned to his commanders, laughing, mocking the legendary Spartans. "Are these the men who never run? Look at them." He didn't wait for careful formations. He pointed at the red cloaks and yelled, "Get them!" The dam broke. Persian cavalry surged forward, crossing the river in a thundering wave. Behind them, the immortals and the rest of the infantry began to run, screaming war cries. No order, no formation. Just a massive stampede of hunters chasing wounded prey. Pausanias, marching up the ridge, heard the rumble. He turned and saw the horizon fill with dust. He looked at his disorganized column. He looked at the Athenians, too far away to help. He looked at his allies, hiding in Plataea. He was alone. 10,000 Spartans and Tegeans, plus 35,000 lightly armed helot slaves against the entire Persian army. The time for maneuvering was over. The Battle of Plataea had begun. And the Spartans were caught flat-footed. The Persians didn't charge in for a fair fight. Mardonius was too smart. He ordered his archers, tens of thousands of them, to plant their wicker shields in the ground and darken the sky. The Spartans and Tegeans were stranded on the open slopes, not in battle formation, caught mid-march. As Persian cavalry swarmed the flanks and archers unleashed volley after volley, human instinct screamed, "Charge or run." Pausanias did neither. He ordered the army to halt and drop to one knee. Then, amidst the screaming and the clattering of arrows on bronze, he turned his back on the enemy. He called for a priest, In the Greek world, you didn't fight until the gods gave permission. A goat was dragged forward. Pausanias slit its throat and inspected the liver. The omens were bad. The gods said no, so Pausanias waited. Imagine being a soldier in that line. You're crouching behind your shield, thud, 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 arrows hammering bronze. You hear screams as arrows find gaps, necks, groins, feet. And your general is staring at goat guts, shaking his head. Now picture the man behind you, a helot slave. No bronze shield, just wicker or leather. He's dying in droves. He's been oppressed by Spartans his whole life, and now he's watching his masters stand like statues while the world ends. The slaughter was passive, industrial, excruciating. One Spartan, Callicrates, described as the most beautiful man in the army, was struck by an arrow in the side. As he lay dying, his last words weren't about pain. "I do not mind dying for Greece," he whispered. "What I mind is dying without having struck a blow." Another goat. Throat slit, bad omens. Wait. The Persians moved closer, now within shouting distance, pouring fire into the motionless ranks. The Tegeans couldn't take it anymore. They started to shift, ready to charge without orders. Pausanias glared at them. He looked up at the Temple of Hera on the distant hill. Tears streamed down his face, a rare display for a Spartan. He screamed a prayer, begging the goddess not to let them die in shame. It was the ultimate test. The phalanx's weakness is rigidity, but here, that rigid adherence to orders was the only thing keeping them from routing. If they charged individually, the cavalry would pick them apart. Finally, just as the Tegeans were about to break, a third goat was sacrificed. Pausanias looked down. The liver was good. He stood up, raised his spear. The iron discipline that had kept 10,000 men frozen in a storm of death suddenly released. The Spartans exploded forward. The waiting was over. The butchery was about to begin. The Persians had set up a barrier of wicker shields to protect their archers. Against light infantry, these were excellent. Against a charging Spartan phalanx, they might as well have been paper. When Pausanias lowered his spear, the Spartans didn't just charge, they surged like a dam bursting. They crashed into the Persian line with such force that the front ranks were lifted off their feet and trampled. The wicker wall disintegrated. Now the battle entered the othismos, the push. And this is where technology became fate. The Persians were brave. Herodotus describes them grabbing Spartan spears with bare hands, snapping the wooden shafts, trying desperately to disarm the enemy. They threw themselves at the shield wall with daggers and short swords. They fought like lions. But courage can't defeat physics. Persians wore linen or scale armor designed to stop arrows, not heavy spear thrusts. Spartans were encased in bronze from chin to knee. When a Persian struck a Spartan, his blade glanced off. When a Spartan struck a Persian, he went through bone. Once the spears shattered, Spartans drew their xiphos, the short leaf blade designed for close quarters murder. This is where the revenge began. Stab to the face, shield bash, step over the corpse, repeat. The helots swarmed into the gaps, finishing wounded Persians with slings, javelins, knives. It was a meat grinder. Dust rose so thick men fought by silhouette and sound. The screaming was constant, Persian commands mixing with Greek roars, months of frustration released in bronze and blood. In the center of the chaos was Mardonius himself. Unlike Xerxes, who watched from a throne on a hill, Mardonius fought. He sat atop a white warhorse, surrounded by 1,000 elite bodyguards, cutting down any Spartan who broke ranks. His presence was the glue holding the Persian army together. As long as they could see that white horse and purple cloak, they fought on. The Spartans saw him too. They realized this wasn't attrition. It was assassination. The phalanx shifted weight, grinding toward the man on the white horse like a predator smelling blood. They ignored piles of gold jewelry on fallen immortals. They ignored expensive silks. They wanted the head of the man who burned Athens. The distance shrank. Persians threw everything into the gap, bodies, horses, camp furniture. But the bronze wall kept coming, step by bloody step. The circle around Mardonius shrank. His 1,000 bodyguards died one by one, their corpses forming a ramp the Spartans climbed to get closer. History records the name of the killer, Aramnestus, the one who is remembered. Aramnestus spotted Mardonius rising above the melee, fighting from his saddle. The Spartan lunged, a 20-pound ash spear driven by a man trained for war since age 7. The blow was catastrophic. Accounts differ. Some say a rock crushed his skull, others a spear through the chest. But the result was the same. The general of Persia, cousin of Xerxes, burner of Athens, slammed into the bloody dirt of Boeotia. He didn't get up. The moment Mardonius hit the ground, the sound of battle changed. Ancient armies were like snakes. Cut off the head and the body dies. The immortals, men who had never retreated, saw their leader fall. They broke. These elite warriors who terrified the known world threw down their shields and ran. But the most telling moment came from Artabazus, second in command, leading 40,000 reserve troops. He watched Mardonius fall from a distance. He did the math, and he turned his horse around. He ordered his 40,000 men to march in the opposite direction, not back to camp. Out of Greece entirely, cold, calculated betrayal. It sealed the doom of everyone left behind. The remaining Persians, leaderless and abandoned, panicked. They fled backward toward the massive wooden stockade they'd built. They scrambled inside, barred the gates, climbed the towers. They'd just trapped themselves in a cage with a tiger. The Spartans arrived at the wall shortly after. But here's a surprising fact. Spartans were terrible at sieges. They were trained for open field combat, not climbing walls. For a moment, the Persians held them off, raining arrows down on frustrated Spartans pacing below like wolves. It looked like a stalemate. Then the Athenians arrived. They'd been fighting Boeotian Greeks on the other side of the battlefield. Hearing of the victory, they sprinted to join. And unlike Spartans, Athenians were engineers. They knew how to take a wall. The Athenians breached the stockade, tearing down a section of wooden rampart. Through that gap poured the full fury of Lacedaemon. What followed wasn't a battle, it was extermination. The Greeks didn't take prisoners. They didn't accept surrenders. They moved through the crowded camp where tens of thousands of Persians were trapped with nowhere to run. And they killed everything that moved. Methodical, relentless, the frustration of Thermopylae, the rage over Athens burning, the misery of thirsty nights, all of it poured out on the trapped Persians. The ground became mud mixed with blood, ankle deep. Of nearly 260,000 Persians who stayed with Mardonius, excluding Artabazus' deserters, ancient sources claim only 3,000 survived. Those numbers are likely exaggerated, but the archaeological reality is clear. An entire generation of Persian manpower was wiped out in a single afternoon. When the screaming finally stopped, a strange silence fell. The dust settled on the greatest graveyard Greece had ever seen. As Spartans and Athenians wiped blood from their eyes, they began to notice something else. They were standing on a fortune. The Persian camp wasn't just military, it was a mobile palace. Mardonius had inherited Xerxes' personal tent, and he lived in imperial splendor. Gold mixing bowls, silver tables, tapestries woven with purple dye worth more than lives, chests overflowing with coins. For Greeks, especially Spartans, whose currency was literally heavy iron bars to discourage wealth, this was like walking into a dream. There's a famous story that perfectly captures this moment. Pausanias, still covered in battle grime, walked into Mardonius' pavilion. He saw silk hangings and gold furniture. He saw Persian chefs cowering in the corner. Instead of killing them, he gave them a bizarre order. Prepare a meal exactly as you would for Mardonius. The chefs went to work. They roasted exotic meats, baked soft breads, opened amphorae of wine, laid out a feast on silver platters. The tent filled with the smell of saffron and roasted fat. Then Pausanias turned to his Spartan cooks. Prepare a standard Spartan meal. The Spartan cooks boiled lentils, pork blood, and vinegar into the infamous black broth. A meal so unappetizing that visitors joked, "Now I understand why Spartans aren't afraid to die." Pausanias placed the two meals side by side. Persian feast, Spartan slop. He called his commanders in, pointed to the contrast, and started laughing. "Men of Greece," he said, "I brought you here to show you the folly of the Medes. Look how he lived. He had all this luxury, yet he came to rob us who have so little." It was profound irony. The Persians had everything to lose. The Greeks had nothing but freedom. That contrast between Eastern luxury and Western austerity became the image that defined Western identity for centuries. But it was also a warning. Pausanias stood there mocking the gold, acting the incorruptible Spartan. But as he stared at that wealth, something inside him broke. The man who mocked the feast would soon crave it. The seeds of his destruction were planted right there among the laughter and loot. While blood dried at Plataea, something almost supernatural happened across the Aegean. Legend says that on the exact same afternoon, the Greek fleet launched an assault on Persian remnants at Mycale in Asia Minor. They burned Persian ships, slaughtered the garrison. 2 victories, same day. Different sides of the sea. King Xerxes had no army left in Europe, no navy to bring one. The Persian wars were over. The West was saved. But here's the tragedy. The alliance between Sparta and Athens was always a marriage of convenience. A wolf and a shark hunting together. Once the prey was dead, they looked at each other with suspicion. Within 30 years, they'd be at each other's throats in the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would destroy them both. As for Pausanias, the hero of Plataea, he became obsessed with Persian luxury. He started wearing Persian clothes, adopting Persian customs. He was eventually accused of conspiring with Persia against his own people. The Spartans trapped him in a temple and starved him to death. The man who saved Greece died alone, hungry, and branded a traitor. The Battle of Plataea answered the 300. It avenged Thermopylae. It saved Western civilization. But it also proved something darker. that victory can corrupt as surely as defeat destroys. The Greeks won the war, but in many ways they lost themselves. If you want to see more deep dives into the battles that shaped our world, subscribe and hit the bell, and let me know in the comments, what legendary battle should I cover next? Until then, remember, history isn't just about the winners, it's about what winning costs.